Greetings. My name is Ron King. In this video, I'm going to discuss the book, The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. The agenda will have two parts. I'll start with the setup and then move to the topics. Within the setup, I'll speak a little bit about the author's background and where I position this book in the literature, then give a quick take that I have of the book, and then look at the book chapters in total and pick those that we're going to focus on. The specific topics within those chapters are shown here. Talk about why he wrote this book, and then talk about the games as he defines finite and infinite. And then within those games, how to accomplish this. And he's going to present 5 components, of which we're going to talk about 3: the just cause, trusting teams, and the worthy rival. And then we'll conclude with Simon's parting message. Simon is a thought leader, well regarded. His original book in 2009, Start With Why, really became a very important book. It captured the attention because it asked the question many of us thought about, but he put it in position so it was very digestible. Followed this up with Leaders Eat Last, which was an influential book. Again, continuing the theme of leadership and how you as a person can develop as a leader. Then he did a little thought piece on thinking about how to be together, and he provides some inspirations that have been effective for him. Then he followed up with a more practical thing, find your why, to give an operational aspect to Start With Why. And the book that we're going to discuss today, a little different genre, but still in the area of trying to help individuals really develop as team leaders and as organizational advancement personnel. I have this 9-box framework that I use to position different books. In this case, I see the book, The Infinite Game, falling in these 2 categories: the circumstances, where he defines the game, and then the worldview, where he defines his mindset. So the way he and I see this is that the worldview is a lens used to see and interpret the world. And in some sense, the interaction between how you see the world affects your circumstances and vice versa. So this book has feet in each of these camps, and other books within the same area, particularly the world view area, mindset, Think Again, and Grit, all books that really have had a big impact on the way people think. So my quick take, to begin with, the criteria I use is that, does the book focus on a novel or important idea? Does it offer or raise a question and then a language to discuss, evaluate, and validate? And is there an organizing framework that we can build on? And is there a labeling type of thing which gives us an ability to connect the concepts together in a unified way? So my sense, from a positive point of view, the book is very thought-provoking. I like the idea of distinguishing the environment, that is the game, with the mindset of how to play that game. He does provide a language to discuss and evaluate. The writing is understandable and interesting. And I love the idea of his just cause. And again, I don't know if it's so original, but it's crafted in a way that's very digestible. The other thing I like is his perspective. He is optimistic and constructive. He comes to the conversation with trying to come up with something to add, something to build, rather than tearing down things. Jagged edges, I had a little tough time with the term infinite game. I'm more immersed in the literature from an economic and strategy point of view. The way he uses the infinite game is more of a philosophical perspective. I really think of infinite games, the label he uses, as a long-term perspective. One thing I would like more of, or maybe build on in following books or other authors, to have testable hypotheses, make it a bit more of a scientific endeavor as opposed to simply a series of case analysis. Here's a table of contents. The book I looked at was a 2019 edition, 251 pages. You can see the 11 chapters listed here. I'm going to start by summarizing what he said as motivating for him to write this, then talk about the definitions, and then an element within the infinite game, a just cause. Skip these other chapters, not that they're not important, but I think I found them maybe a little less interesting than the points we're going to make here. So in chapter 7, we're going to talk about trusting teams. Then we're going to focus on the worthy rival and summarize with my take. So part 4, why I wrote this. And the quote from the book is, I wrote this to rally those who are ready to challenge that. And then when he's referring to that as a finite mindset, status quo, and replace it with a reality that is vastly more conducive to our deep-seated need to do 3 things. 1, feel safe, contribute to something bigger than ourselves, and provide for ourselves and our family. These are 3 concepts, safe, inspired, and fulfilled, are really revisited throughout the book. So he uses these as sort of his anchors for thinking about how to build something that is good pro-socially and for oneself. So in chapter 1, he characterizes finite game and contrasts it with an infinite game. And in the left-hand column, we see the dimensions, the 7 dimensions he's going to compare them. And the finite game, he says, has these characteristics. It's got an endpoint that's clear and known. The rules are fixed. The winners are clear. There are metrics known and agreed upon. Fixed and known players. The objective is to win, and to do that, you analyze what's best for yourself. Surprises are not welcome. And an example would be a football game or chess. And within business, there are lots of finite games in business. An example, if you're an airline, is simply boarding the plane. So getting the passengers from the waiting area onto the plane, one could think about that as a game. There's certain rules, there's certain expectations, known players, etc. In an infinite game, it's an infinite game in the sense that it has no endpoint. Anyway, from the point of view of a human perspective, rules are changeable. There isn't an outcome per se. Along the way, a metric is, are you ahead or behind relative to where you were before? And in terms of potentially your pacing partners. The players, changeable and unknown. The objective is not do you win, but do you stay in the game? Does the game stay ongoing? And thus, the fact that we've got a more broad perspective that it's not only my involvement in the game, but the game itself to continue. Surprises are welcome, because by having a surprise, you can think creatively and alternative options. Example, life, politics, business, all things that go on. Now, again, an individual life is a finite thing per se, but the idea of life itself, he characterizes as an infinite game. And an example from a business is any business that has a horizon where their focus is on their stakeholders in the long term. Gives many examples of finite game mindset and an infinite game mindset. And we're going to characterize what a mindset is versus a finite game. But the first one listed here, U.S.-Vietnam conflict, it characterizes the U.S. as playing a game that was finite. They wanted to win. They wanted to accomplish that, a somewhat local objective. Where Vietnam was fighting, the Vietnam people and leaders were staying alive for their continued independence and existence. So he said, when you have the mentality of Vietnam, even though you win lose many of the battles, and most battles in Vietnam were won by the U.S., not Vietnamese, but that they had an infinite mindset. They weren't deterred by losses as they built up, because they really felt that their long-term survival depended upon it. There gives some other examples. You can read these in the book. I do think it is interesting to make these contrasts, but it's a little bit hard for me to understand ex ante. Would a company be more likely to have a finite mindset or an infinite mindset? Obviously, these are gray areas, but it certainly is the case that he presents a set of cases where the infinite game mindset fits nicely into his model. So thinking about this book relative to the literature, Simon built his book on a 1986 book by James Carse. You see the name Finite and Infinite Game, and this is more of a philosophical approach to understanding this. And prior to that, the literature really was much more steeped in economics. This was initiated in 1944 by von Neumann and Morgenstern, wrote this classic book. It's everyone who goes to graduate school in PhD programs study this. It's a very, very influential book. It opened up literatures that have had a great deal of impact, both in the academic literature, but all facts of life, war planning, business planning, international politics. It's certainly a very profound book. And then going back even further, most people look back to the mid 1500s, where this was where the idea of analyzing games in strategic conflict, where this originated. So back to the book, he wants to focus on leaders, and he said if a leader wants to have an infinite mindset, you need to think about these three things. The first is you don't get to choose whether a particular game is finite or infinite. That in some sense, we come into a game that's already characterized as one or the other. But what we do get to choose is whether we want to join the game. And then should we join, we can play with this finite mindset, that is thinking about winners and losers and known players and known payoffs, or an infinite mindset, where in some sense, instead of looking and evaluating on these step-by-step individual games, you look at the future, you look at the long term. So to accomplish this game of having an infinite mindset, again, an infinite game, and within that game you can have an infinite mindset, he provides these 5 elements, these 5 essential practices: just cause, trusting teams, worthy rival, existential flexibility, and courage to lead. And all of them represent a chapter in the book, and they're worth reading. We're going to spend a bit of time starting with just cause. And on page 32 and 33, he defines this as a just cause is a specific vision of a future state that does not yet exist, a state so appealing that people are willing to make sacrifices in order to help advance towards that vision. So in other words, if I'm a business leader and I have a just cause, and I genuinely share my just cause with other people working in my organization, they're going to buy into that. They're going to appeal to this vision of mine, so they're willing to make sacrifices personally to help move to the vision. So this is a vision that's shared between myself, the organization, and those working with me. And he said to be a just cause, you need these 5 characteristics. It's for something, that is affirmative and optimistic, inclusive, open to all, service-oriented, primary pro-social, resilient, that it is able to be somewhat anti-fragile. It can take some challenges and overcome them, and it's idealistic. He says big, bold, and ultimately unachievable. So these are the 5 aspects, the 5 things that must be there in order for something to be a just cause. So to give you a little perspective, here is what Simon says in his book on page 34 for his why, with why you do something, and then what his infinite game or what his just cause is. His why: to inspire people to do what inspires them so that together we can change the world for the better. So he thinks about why as your history up to today, that in essence is the energy, the life force that you have today that puts you in a mindset to say, now let's look at the future. And what the mindset does is take the future perspective, and the just causes for him His just cause is to build a world in which the vast majority of people wake up inspired, feel safe at work, and return home fulfilled at the end of the day. And I'm looking for as many people as possible who will join me in the cause. So these are examples. His why statement gets him up to today, and his just cause, which is part of his forward-looking vision as to what he would like to accomplish. Right? And you might quibble with this here, but that's his guiding light. Whatever yours is, he agrees, and he includes this, and I would like to emphasize it. If you are developing a just cause, write it down, think about it, modify it as needed. It acts as your compass. Jumping ahead in the book to chapter 7, Trusting Teams, and he reports research that others have conducted on SEAL teams. And he has two dimensions here, trust, and define trust here as the person's character. And says this is humility and sense of personal responsibility, which makes sense in the military, that trust someone, their personal responsibility for representing the team and representing the overall mission, very important. And he contrasts that on the vertical axis here, performance, where performance is about the technical competence, how good is someone at their job. And what he reports as interesting is that if we have someone who is a high performer, they really have the technical competence, but they don't take the personal responsibility or they aren't trusted, this is a toxic environment, because people like that, according to his interpretation of research, really don't mix with the average person who's in the team, people who may not be the high performer. And what the research on these SEALs team suggests is that there will be an agreed upon trade-off, that if somebody can be trusted more, even though they're less capable on performance, that they would be preferred over this toxic group. And even a person or a group who are low performers but have high trust maybe dominate the high performance, low trust. Interesting characterization here when you think about these trade-offs. Chapter 9, Simon creates this element of a worthy rival, and he discusses this with this phrase, a worthy rival is another player in the game worthy of comparison. And he quotes this on page 167. He goes on to say he's had someone who he's always been competing with on his own, maybe in some sense compares himself maybe unfavorably on occasion, and the person he identifies as Adam Grant. And then he said, I really found Adam made me better because I saw him as an honorable person who really had a constructive mindset, and it raised my game. And so the recommendation here is in this overall infinite mindset, get a worthy rival. And I totally agree with that. So Simon's parting message, and this is taken from page 27, so it's early in the book, but I think it captures his parting message. And when it is our time to leave the game, we'll look back at our lives and our careers and say, I lived a life worth living. And more importantly, when imagining what the future holds, we'll see how many people we've inspired to carry on the journey without us. And it's great, something that builds, that we have this legacy of having impact in the future. So this recommendation is work to create a flywheel of positive change. And to do that, talk with others, debate with others, get people like-minded who have energy that you can bounce ideas off, and sometimes support each other. Every day offers challenges. Sometimes we can deal with them individually, but in many cases, it's more enjoyable and probably a better solution to work and talk with others. And as I mentioned earlier, write down your just cause. It acts as a compass. So to summarize here, I use these 3 criteria. I found the book very thought-provoking. Of course, this quick 20-minute version of a summary isn't adequate, but I don't think one should look at a book independent of the literature. I think you should use a meta point of view, like compare this book to the other ones, maybe Think Again, Growth Mindset, Grit, and there are many, many books. And I think a positive way to advance your thinking, your critical thinking, and your capability of making good judgments that put you in a position for advancing is to read a lot of books and integrate them. I don't know if there are any books that have kind of that secret sauce. So overall, I strongly encourage you to read this book and to discuss it with others and to see how it fits with your purpose. With that, I'm signing off. Again, I'm Ron King, and looking forward to our next conversation down the road.